Right, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us from all around the globe. Welcome to our fourth monthly seminar in the series on death, the afterlife, and metempsychosis. My name is Ashkan Barani. I'm a postdoc research fellow at Monash University and serve as the metempsychosis project coordinator. I would like to begin our session by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which I work and pay my respect to indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm very pleased to introduce our guest lecturer today, Professor Ankur Barua. Dr. Barua is a senior lecturer in Hindu studies at the Faculty of Divinity at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. After receiving his Bachelor of Science in Physics from St. Stephen's College at the University of Delhi, Dr. Barua shifted to the humanities. He received his PhD in Theology and Religious Studies from the Faculty of Divinity, Cambridge in 2005. Professor Barua's main fields of specialization are Vedantic, Hindu philosophical theology, and Indo-Islamic styles of sociology. He researches the conceptual constellations and the social structures of the Hindu traditions, both in pre-modern context in South Asia and in colonial milieux, where multiple ideas of Hindu identity were configured along transnational circuits between India, Britain, France, Germany, and the United States. He is an incredibly prolific scholar in religious studies. His first monograph, The Divine Body in History, a comparative study of time and embodiment in the theologies of St. Augustine and Ramanuja, was published by Peter Lang in 2009. His latest publications are The Hindu Self and Its Muslim Neighbors, Contested Borderlines on Bengali Landscapes, published by Lexington Books in 2022, and Exploring Hindu Philosophy, published by Equinox in 2023. Today, Ankur will share his knowledge and insights with us about death, the afterlife, and reincarnation in Hinduism. The title of his lecture is The Pilgrimage of the Self, the Compass of Reality, Hindu Theological Visions of Reincarnation and Immortality. This is a 45 minutes lecture followed by 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So without further ado, I invite Dr. Barua to start his lecture. Dear Ankur, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ashkan, for that concise and precise introduction. And hello, everyone. I am glad to be able to join you today via the miracle of technology. This is the first time I am speaking to someone based in Australia. Someday, I hope to be able to travel from our small island to your much bigger and warmer island. Now, the topic of reincarnation has exercised my intellect for many decades now, and I'm pleased to be able to participate in this forum that is exploring some of the interreligious histories of this topic. Now, let me get down to work. A discussion of the theme of reincarnation in Hinduism can move in many different directions. Since today I have only 45 minutes, let me begin by spelling out three methodological parameters. First, the term Hinduism can mean different things in different socio-historical contexts. A Hindu worldview may look quite different if you move the temporal slider from 1500 BCE to 800 BCE to 200 BCE to 400 CE to 1500 CE to where we are right now, that is June 2023. The reason why this point is relevant is that concepts such as karma, samsara, and atman may have different meanings in different texts and traditions across this temporal continuum. So if I pick up a Sanskrit text from around 900 CE or an English text from 2019, I may find themes relating to reincarnation in a fairly well-developed form there. But these themes may not be so clearly articulated in a Sanskrit text from 900 BCE. What all this means is that we should not ask from a socio-historical perspective a question such as what is the Hindu understanding of reincarnation, because the answer can vary depending on the context. Second, my discussion will be largely theological, as noted in the title of this talk, and this means that I will be drawing mainly from theological texts that are placed under a category called Vedanta. These are commentarial treatises from around 800 CE onwards. And before anyone runs away on hearing the word theological, let me say that I'm using this word in a fairly lightweight sense to mean the exercise of developing forms of reason-shaped argument to articulate the concept of the divine reality. Third, because Vedanta theological texts form a vast ocean, I will be more specific. I'm going to approach themes relating to reincarnation in this ocean with a specific question. Is it rational to believe that the world is structured in accordance with processes of reincarnation? To put it bluntly, where is the proof that reincarnation is happening to you right now? And if there is no such proof or evidence, why do you believe in such a thing? Now, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, but before we do start eating, let me tell you what is in the pudding. I will begin with a sketch of some key concepts associated with Hindu theological beliefs in reincarnation. As we will see on many Hindu landscapes, reincarnation is a deeply soteriological theme, that is a therapeutic theme associated with the termination of worldly suffering and the attainment of a transcendental condition of perfection. A certain diagnosis of the human condition is offered and a form of spiritual medicine or therapy is prescribed. Next, I will explore three standard critiques of belief in reincarnation and sketch some responses to these critiques. Through this conceptual exercise, which is not intended to be conclusive, I seek to highlight to you some of the metaphysical and the epistemological presuppositions of beliefs and practices relating to reincarnation. Here, I will briefly outline some Christian theological reflections on the notion of reincarnation. Hopefully, you can see why I have titled the talk, The Pilgrimage of the Self, the Compass of Reality. The world is viewed as a moral stage across which human beings travel through transmigration or reincarnation towards the goal of spiritual perfection. And it is vital to ensure that all this journeying remains reality-rooted and reality-oriented. Now, as I have indicated, there is no one understanding of reincarnation across the diverse spectrum of Hindu traditions. However, just so that you and I do not get lost in the details, here is a series of metaphors for everyone. Think of karma as the engine of a car. Think of reincarnation as that car. Think of yourself as the driver in that car. Think of the world as a highway along which the car is moving, and think of God as the ultimate destination of that highway. So the quality of our driving at stage C on the highway is a causal product of the quality of our driving at previous stages A and B, just as the quality of our driving at stage C informs and regulates the quality of our driving at subsequent stages D and E. So in the light of this picture, think of karma as a bi-directional arrow. In one direction, every action which is morally relevant reinforces a disposition to perform that action. In another direction, every such action leaves behind some traces, some residues, call them seeds. And these seeds, charged with a karmic momentum, will bear fruit at some point in the future. If not in this lifetime, in a subsequent lifetime. So the fruit in the form of joy or misery will be commensurate with the seed. Some of the material I'm going to discuss now will appear in an edited volume titled T&T Clark Handbook on Suffering and the Problem of Evil. I note this point because my publishers have asked me to do so. Let's start with a fundamental concept, namely dukkha, which is a Sanskrit word with multiple meanings. One straightforward meaning of dukkha is the experience of pain and grief. Another meaning is a deep sense of dissatisfaction with the limitations of human existence and an impermanent world. In this world suffused with dukkha, Hindu theologians may seek to make sense of the why in these two questions. Why is there so much suffering in God's good world? And why me in particular who is suffering in this agonizing way? Across 2,000 years of Hindu theological literature, we find two styles of response. The first style is for the beginner, and the second style is for those who are becoming spiritually perfect or perfected. In the first style, certain responses are given to the inquisitive individual to try to reduce the sting, epistemic as well as existential, of dukkha by using concepts such as karma, reincarnation, divine presence, cosmic order, spiritual progression, and so on. At this preliminary stage of his spiritual pedagogy, the individual is informed that the world is structured by circuits of moral causation, that is karma-motivated causation, and so their experiences of suffering are not random events or inscrutable singularities, but are woven into a world that is oriented towards liberation from suffering. Now, along this pathway, which can lead through cosmological cycles of mind-bogglingly vast durations, an individual would learn to inhabit the world without always demanding answers to the why. It is sufficient that they are able to discern the mysterious divine presence operating as much in joy as in sorrow and live without repeatedly asking why. At the summit of what we may call a learned ignorance, argumentative disputation will be refined into an eloquent silence in which individuals live trustfully with the realization that the world is surrounded by the divine and the divine is in the world. In the end, all shall be well. In other words, through karmic processes of moral purgation, some individuals may become so completely fine-tuned to the divine presence that they receive even their dukkha, or perhaps especially their dukkha, as a concrete sign of the divine presence that is reforming their egocentric existences. So, if I were spiritually perfect, and I can assure you that I'm not, I would be able to discern the divine presence as much in the beautiful garden outside my house as in the terrible headache yesterday afternoon. To make some sense of these styles of response, let us go back to the source of various Hindu ways of conceptualizing the human self, the divine reality, and the relation between them, and this root is called the Veda. In a strictly historical sense, the term Veda refers to the hymns, mantras, and invocations in compositions such as the Rig Veda. In a slightly broader sense, the term Veda can refer to several subsequent scriptural collections such as the Upanishads, the Manusmriti, the Bhagavad Gita, Puranas, and so on. And these collections have alternately reinforced or re-articulated the visions of the Rig Veda. The word Veda is derived from a root which means to know. This knowledge is not simply a collection or a compilation of information relating to worldly entities, such as the number of books or the color of cell phones in my room, but the deep understanding of the connections or bandhu that run across the world of humans and the world of divine powers. The verses of the Rig Veda are suffused by a vision of the world as an organically connected whole whose multiple parts have emerged from a sacrificial dismemberment of a cosmic person. This primordial sacrifice, which is performed by the gods, generates dharma, another multivalent Sanskrit concept which encompasses meanings such as structure, order, harmony, and stability across diverse social, cosmological, moral, and ontological levels. Crucially, if this original primordial sacrifice is not ritually repeated at key temporal stages across the day and across the year, the fabrics of reality would unravel and evil, that is the absence or degeneration of dharma, would overpower the world. So the Vedic cosmos is poised somewhat precariously between order and chaos and good and evil, and the repetition of the ritual infuses the renewed power of being into the world. In some passages of the Upanishads, this Vedic cosmos is pictured symbolically so that the sacrifice is understood not as an external ritual performed with material implements, but an offering of the individual's vital principles into the purgative fires of self-inquiry. Know thyself. This motive of non-dharma as the absence or breakdown of cosmological harmony is developed across the therapeutic visions of Sankhya Yoga, which highlight the pervasiveness of dukkha and also sketch some disciplines for its termination. Thus, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra 2.15 declares that everything indeed is dukkha to the one who discerns correctly. Towards the cessation or termination of dukkha, several techniques are laid down, such as yogic postures, breath control, and cultivation of an awareness of oneself as pure witness, which is always liberated from the cycles of reincarnation or samsara. These cosmological visions and technologies of the self are reworked into theological patterns of Hindu hermeneutics, which begin to develop from around the 8th century CE and which are placed under the category of Vedanta. According to these Vedantic worldviews, liberation from the cycles of reincarnation or samsara involves attaining the sacred knowledge or wisdom, vidya, of the self, Atman, and the self's rootedness in the divine milieu or matrix, Brahman. However, because we are generally speaking in a state of ignorance or lack of vidya about our true non-physical self and our divine foundation or root, we are mired in dukkha or suffering. As I indicated earlier, Vedanta is a vast ocean, and on this occasion, I will only offer an outline of two highly important forms, styles. According to Advaita Vedanta, as systematized by Shankara roughly the 8th century CE, the wisdom or the vidya through which we may overcome the cycles of reincarnation is this. Between the true spiritual self, Atman, and the divine foundation beyond all qualities and descriptions, Brahman, there is an ontological not-two-ness or Advaita. According to several forms of theistic metaphysics articulated by Ramanuja, Madhva, and others, the wisdom that will take us across the turbulent oceans of worldly suffering to the safe harbor of the divine reality is the cultivation of a wholehearted and unswerving devotional love, bhakti, through which we may become unwaveringly concentred in the supremely personal Lord Ishvara. So on these theistic landscapes, dukkha, which is one marker of a world structured by karma and reincarnation, is a calibrator of the pilgrim's gradual progress towards an intensified realization of the presence of the Lord in the here and now, and in everything and in every place. That is, dukkha is a reminder that an individual has not yet become completely purged of his egocentric ways of being and has not become completely centered in the Lord, Ishvara. In recent years, several commentators on Vedantic philosophical theology have sought to resource its idioms in engaging with the problem of evil as it is presented in Anglophone philosophy of religion. This is how the problem appears in the Vedantic context I have just outlined. The ultimate basis of samsara is the indivisible Brahman, which is not tainted or corrupted by any human finitude. And yet, samsara is palpably mired in suffering. So what is the source? What is the origin? What is the root of suffering, of dukkha? We may ask whether A, Brahman is unwilling to eliminate suffering, or B, Brahman does desire to remove suffering, but does not have the power to do so. A leitmotif running through this Vedantic milieu is that the suffering that is currently being experienced by an individual is calibrated and guided by a karma-guided vector. Crucially, this vector runs across multiple productions and dissolutions of the world, which is said to be without a temporal origination. In other words, the question precisely when did the world begin does not have a chronologically determinate answer such as 13.8 billion years ago. As far back as we may go on a temporal continuum, there was yet a previous world order. Now, an engagement with the problem of evil is called theodicy in the philosophical literature. One of the main claims to cognitive fame of a karma theodicy, that is a theodicy that uses the language of karma and reincarnation, is its perceived systematicity and completeness. Every instance of suffering is accounted for so that there is no gratuitous suffering or pointless suffering. Thus, Max Weber famously declared that the karma doctrine represents the most consistent theodicy ever produced by history. And this claim has been re-articulated by many other thinkers. For instance, the Hindu guru Swami Paramananda, you can see the quotation on the slide, argues that a world structured by karma and reincarnation is a seamless moral whole, All reward and punishment are only the natural reactions of our own actions and wholly determined by us. We reward and punish ourselves. So I return to a point I made earlier. It is important not to speak of the Hindu karma theodicy. There are significant differences across the multiple Hindu traditions on themes such as the dynamics of karmic operation, the nature of the human self, the ontological reality of samsara, and so on. Be that as it may, here is one common theme running through the Vedantic traditions with the trustful certainty or with the trustful hope that there is ultimately no moral randomness in the world. Each individual can forge their pathways of spiritual development across many lifetimes. This cosmological operation of karmic causation is delineated with semi-quantitative precision by the Bhagavata Purana 8.1.45. We are told that the same person enjoys the fruits of the same meritorious or demeritorious act in the next world in the same manner and to the same extent according to the manner and to the extent to which that act has been performed in this world. So that is almost an equation. In sketching these soteriological vistas of reincarnation across worlds without chronological beginning, Vedantic theologians are expounding some crucial aphorisms from a text called the Brahma Sutras. These aphorisms engage with the viewpoint that Brahman cannot be the true source of our world with all its inequalities and imperfections. In his commentary on Brahma Sutra 2.1.34, Shankara responds that the inequalities we perceive are not directly generated by Brahman. Rather, they are the karmic fruits of the actions of particular individuals. Therefore, when Brahman produces a new world order by taking into consideration these fruits from a previous world order, Brahman is not morally culpable or reproachable. Here is an example. Just as the rain is the general cause for the origination of all crops, and the differences between rice and barley are a result of their specific potentialities, Brahman is the common ground of all worldly beings, and their inequalities are a result of their specific karmic merits and demerits. Likewise, in a commentary on Brahma Sutra 2.1.33, Ramanuja sketches the prima facie claim that a compassionate world, compassionate Lord would not produce a world such as ours, which is filled with evil and suffering. He responds that the Lord produces the world as an expression of superabundant production or lila. Though the Lord is self-satisfied and has no desires that are not yet attained, the Lord may find a certain activity delightful, not because the Lord could gain something from it, but simply because it is enjoyable. That is lila. However, while the Lord's production of the next world order is not structured by any necessity, it does follow the karmic fruits of individuals. So that once again, we cannot charge the Lord with partiality or cruelty regarding the different types and forms of dukkha undergone by different individuals in this world. At the heart of these Vedantic visions is the conviction rooted in scriptural revelation that the spiritual or non-physical self, Atman, is deathless or immortal. And this conviction is for many Hindus a source of consolation in their experiences of loss. These verses from the Bhagavad Gita 8.5-6 are sometimes recited to dying people. Whoever at the time of death gives up the body while remembering me, Lord Krishna, alone attains my being. Of this there is no doubt. Whatever state one remembers while giving up the body at the time of death, that state one attains without fail. What we call death is strictly speaking the dissolution of the physical body. However, the subtle body, which you can think of as a cognitive spiritual envelope containing karmic merits and demerits, transmigrates into a new bodily form. In such a moral order, shaped by karma and reincarnation, there is no radical or gratuitous or pointless or mindless suffering, and dukkha is pointed towards liberation, that is, towards some form of union or communion with Brahman. Animating this cosmological context is one highly important motive from the Bhagavad Gita. To negate egocentric habits, which are said to accumulate karma, one has to offer one's fruits of action and the underlying sense of agency itself to the Lord Krishna. With this attitude of self-surrender, one continues to live in the world, but one is not of the world. somewhat like the lotus that grows out of muddy water but is not tainted by that muddy water. Therefore, karmic processes should not be viewed merely or exclusively as a juridical system of compensation. Rather, individuals are said to undergo in and through the retributive processes of karma an ego-effacing reformation towards the divine reality. Those individuals who are indeed liberated in this world order will not subsequently return to the next world order. So there is a teleological arrow running through these world orders, and belief in karma and reincarnation does not amount to accepting that each world order is qualitatively identical. And that brings me to the second part of my talk. In recent decades, the topic of the rationality of a karma theodicy has been intensely debated. As indicated, a karma-shaped explanation of the presence and the distribution of suffering was presented by Weber as the most rationally comprehensive account. However, several thinkers have interrogated such a claim on conceptual and moral grounds. I will sketch three major lines of critique and propose certain responses. Since this type of discussion can get quite dialectical, that is, moving back and forth between arguments and counter-arguments, here is a summary statement. A karma theodicy offers certain reason-based responses to the problem of evil in terms of the moral processes of reincarnation, which are said to be directed towards the transcendental horizon of liberation. These forms of moral reasoning are packaged with various metaphysical and epistemological presuppositions. And thus, if we ask questions such as, why is the world animated by reincarnation? And how do we know that this reincarnation-based explanation is truth-tracking or truthful? Hindu texts, teachers, and traditions speak in the language of trustful acceptance, divine productivity, and ultimate mystery. First, one of the most significant critiques of beliefs relating to karma and reincarnation is the seeming lack of proportionality between certain horrendous forms of dukkha we see around us and the claim that every form of dukkha has soteriological directionality and cosmic value. The severity of the suffering that many people undergo seems grossly disproportionate to any evil they may have committed, whether in this lifetime or in previous lifetimes. In response, a defender of a karma theodicy may claim that the relevant proportionalities are regulated by God or Ishvara, who is the overseer or guardian of karmic processes, but these proportionalities are not currently accessible to us human beings with finite intellectual powers. Given these epistemic gaps, a karma theodicy should not be treated as a predictive calculus where the precise amount and the differential distribution of karma, of dukkha, can be outlined right now. That is, a karma theodicy should be regarded not as an empirically verifiable doctrine with respect to a particular instance of dukkha, but as a theocentric invitation to cultivate patience with the hope that dukkha will be seen retrospectively as charged with soteriological telos. A positive formulation of the principle of proportionality, namely infinite perfection cannot be attained in the short span of just one lifetime, is developed by S. Radhakrishnan, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, whom you can see the quotation in the slide, on the slide in this way. We cannot in one life exercise all the powers we possess or exhaust all the values we strain after. There are no blind rushes to the goal. A negative formulation of the principle of proportionality, namely no finite accumulation of human errors can be commensurate with everlasting punishment, is often employed in Hindu rejections of the possibility of eternal damnation. For instance, the Hindu guru Swami Nikhilananda argues that to believe in the eternal punishment of the soul for a mistake of a few years is to go against the dictate of reason. Interestingly, from a Christian standpoint, Geddes McGregor uses this principle to make a qualified argument for the compatibility of Christian soteriology and belief in karma and reincarnation, pointing out that different individuals receive different sets of chances to respond to God in their widely different spans of earthly life. McGregor argues the notion that each is to be judged for all eternity on the basis of such disparate opportunities is totally incompatible with the concept of a beneficent and almighty God. The doctrine of transmigration fits perfectly as a Christian interpretation of purgatory. For another recent Christian reflection on the significance of belief in reincarnation, I turn to the Christian theologian Origen Jatana as he grapples with the question of the destiny of human beings who were born before the Christ even, or who did not receive an opportunity to come into direct contact with it. Jatana argues that any proposed solution must hold together what he regards as two vital truths. First, the decisiveness of the Christ given for all humanity, and second, the universal salvific outreach of the God of love who wills that all enter into a fellowship with God through the knowledge of the Christ given, and discusses a number of answers which variously state that individuals will become recipients of Christ's preaching after death, or that the offer of salvation through Christ will be given to the unevangelized at the last judgment, and so on. He argues that these responses have certain problems and instead puts forward the following solution. Human beings who have died without encountering the Christ given may be reborn into a situation where they shall have the opportunity of knowing about Christ and entering into a relationship with Christ. I sketch these two Christian engagements with the motive of reincarnation, mainly because this forum is exploring an interreligious history of metempsychosis. Let me now move on to a second objection to belief in reincarnation. Namely, since individuals do not usually recall their putative past lives, they cannot be held morally culpable in this life for crimes they do not remember. Therefore, the processes of karma and reincarnation cannot serve as an instrument for moral education, since we do not know what our past errors are for which we are presently said to be undergoing suffering. At least three types of responses have been offered to this critique. The first response states that even though we do not usually have powers of recalling past lives, this epistemic inaccessibility does not in itself disprove the reality of a reincarnating self. Just as merely because we do not remember parts of our early childhood, we do not conclude that those stages did not exist. The fact that most of us do not have memories of a previous life does not conclusively demonstrate the falsity of reincarnation. The second response is to claim that the general absence of recall is in fact beneficial to our moral progress and is an integral aspect of the dynamics of reincarnation. If our mind were overburdened with memories of past transgressions, we would not be able to keep our attention focused on the path ahead that lies to moral improvement. So, take the example of a drunk driver who kills a pedestrian and then falls into a coma after colliding with a pole. Though on recovering consciousness, the driver does not have any memory or awareness of the accident, a court of law would reasonably charge the driver as guilty. Likewise, even though we do not consciously remember the specific details of past mistakes, the theory of karma and reincarnation requires us to acknowledge them. However, this scenario indicates a crucial disanalogy. A driver who believes the statements offered by the court of law regarding the accident does so on the grounds of the belief that the legal authorities are not being deceptive and have reliable access to the truth of the matter. The key point is whether, to sustain the analogy, we do have such credible grounds for the belief that even though we do not consciously remember our past mistakes from a supposedly past life or previous life, we did in fact commit them. The same disanalogy applies to the example relating to our childhood. We believe on the grounds of the testimony of our parents, whom we do regard as reliable witnesses, that we existed during the childhood years of which we have no conscious memory. Once again, the vital point is this: given that we are not able to specify correlations between our present suffering and our putatively past mistakes, whether there are any trustworthy witnesses whose reports regarding a reincarnating self are veridical or truthful. So, the debate ultimately turns on whether reincarnation is in fact a reality. Now, the third response is that some spiritual practitioners or perfected people who have undergone specific disciplines are indeed able to access their past lives, the implicit claim being that there really are such prenatal existences. Thus, the Buddha claims at various places in the Pali Canon the ability to recall past lives, and the Manusmriti states in this vein, maybe that is on the handout, or maybe not, that's fine. By reciting the Vedas constantly, by performing purifications, by engaging in ascetic toil, and by showing no hostility to any creature, one gets to remember one's former birth. So this is from a text called the Manusmriti, roughly the 2nd century of the Common Era. We may regard memories as latent dispositions which are carried over across lives and which link together multiple existences, even though there are at present no conscious memories of previous lives. As individuals develop or advance spiritually, they may become capable of retrieving these deep memories from subconscious mental streams. The acceptance of a karma theodicy, therefore, ultimately rests on an attitude or disposition of trust. The argument will run as follows. We believe that we are involved in cycles of reincarnation directed towards spiritual perfection, even though we have no knowledge regarding the how or the dynamics of the karmic operations, because we trust in the omniscience or quasi-omniscience of figures such as the Buddha, Hindu gurus, yogis, and so on. Third, the claim that the karma theodicy is a rationally complete account of the world of dukkha is said to be, from a moral perspective, its weak link. If an individual's present dukkha is a result of their karmic demerits, so that there is no unmerited or gratuitous suffering, we seem to be living in a fatalistic system. However, various proponents of karma and reincarnation have claimed that these moral processes should not be understood in terms of strong causal determinism. Rather, they presuppose a libertarian or at least a compatibilist account of free will, which is to say that persons can exercise some measure of volitional agency or power over karmic sequences or processes. As Swami Paramananda, that is number 7 on the slide, points out, we have brought our ideas, our instincts, our good feelings, and also our obstacles, but that does not mean that since this life is the product of karma, its conditions are inevitable. No matter what we have brought, we can adjust and readjust and remold. Therefore, while certain aspects of our embodiment are inherited through antecedent karmic chains, we possess some volitional space or agency or elbow room to work against vicious dispositions and cultivate virtuous styles of living. And because individuals can thus exercise some measure of moral agency, a karma theodicy should not be read as supporting styles of amoralism. Various Hindu scriptural texts exhort individuals to cultivate other regarding virtues, such as benevolence, compassion, and so on. And now I move towards the conclusion. In short, the explanation for why an individual is arguing dukkha is given in terms of their karmic deserts, their merits or demerits. But if we push the explanatory chain backwards and ask, but why is there a karmic order in the first place? One way to respond is to speak of the Lord's joyful creativity, lila, which is not cognitively accessible to our finite human intellects. The world is suffused with lila, but for reasons that are not comprehensible to us, the darkness of dukkha runs through this surplus. However, as an individual begins to re-envision the world as rooted in lila, they may become so saturated with a sense of the divine presence that they perceive the divine reality as much in suffering, dukkha, as in joy. In this rewiring of one's subjectivities, a karma theodicy is not so much an explanation for why they're suffering as an invitation to become more deeply God-intoxicated and trustfully accept that there is, in the ultimate analysis, no pointless or unmerited suffering. For instance, the Bhagavata Purana, this is a text from roughly the 9th, 10th century of the Common Era, contains many narratives which highlight the soteriological telos of worldly laws. it is through such a loss that individuals become progressively God-rooted or God-orientated. And this motive is expressed evocatively at 1.8.25, which is number 8 on the slide. O teacher of the universe, who in this case is Krishna, the God Krishna, may there always be calamities everywhere, and may we have a vision of you in those calamities so that we would not have to see worldly existence, that is samsara again. In other words, the ideal devotee of Krishna would not shun dukkha or run away from dukkha, but rather, somewhat paradoxically, seek its purgative fires, which would burn away the impurities encasing the egocentric self. In recent times, this note is struck by various other Hindu gurus, by various Hindu gurus, but the one I have in mind is someone called Ramakrishna Paramhamsa. His dates are 1836 to 1886. Ramakrishna Paramhamsa presents the spiritual pathway in terms of devotional practices of becoming reoriented to God in and through crucibles of suffering, so that individuals would overcome egoistic absorption and see God in everything. Let me conclude. The world, the Vedic world, the Vedantic world, the Hindu world that I have been outlining, remains perched on the edge of horrendous, horrific evils, even as various motives are hermeneutically resourced across Hindu sociocultural milieux to speak of the divine reality as the power of being that is transmuting or transfiguring worldly dukkha. The language of theodicy and an awareness of epistemic limitations are deeply intertwined, as we have seen, in various Hindu theological milieus. Dukkha is an existential reminder to remain anchored in the secure harbor of Brahman while crossing the terrifying, turbulent oceans of the world. Such spiritually perfect people would learn to re-envision their dukkha as a soteriological sign of the ongoing perfection of the world, in which nothing is ultimately or irredeemably evil, so that the problem of evil gradually becomes not so much solved as dissolved. And on that note, I shall stop.